The year 1970 marked the high point of the American muscle car era. Raw power, wild styling, aggressive names, and big block V8s that could roast tires for blocks. But it was also the beginning of the end. With rising insurance premiums, stricter emissions regulations looming, and a brewing fuel crisis, many legendary muscle machines had only one glorious year before being axed, neutered, or forgotten altogether. These are the 10 muscle cars that burned hot in 1970 and then vanished. Some were one-year wonders. Others were cut down before they could evolve. All of them were bold, loud.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 10. The 1971 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS454, a powerful personal luxury coupe that flirted with muscle car performance, but never quite escaped the shadow of its more famous Chevrolet siblings. Today, we examine a fascinating yet often overlooked corner of the muscle car era, the 1971 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS454. This car was Chevrolet's attempt to blend luxury, style, and big block performance into one cohesive package. It had the heart of a Chevelle SS454, but wore a suit and tie, sleek styling, upscale interiors, and a quieter marketing strategy. But despite its impressive powertrain and refined looks, the Monte Carlo SS454 never achieved the same fame or following as its siblings, the Chevelle SS and the Camaro Z28 SS. And by the end of 1971, Chevrolet quietly pulled the plug on the SS454 option, never to return in the same form. Let's explore why. The Chevrolet Monte Carlo debuted in 1970 as a personal luxury coupe, Chevrolet's answer to the Pontiac Grand Prix, which had proven that performance buyers were just as interested in refinement and style as raw speed. The Monte Carlo shared its basic platform with the Chevelle, but had unique sheet metal, a longer hood, a more formal roofline, and a greater emphasis on luxury. Think of it as the Chevelle's better-dressed, more mature sibling. Yet Chevrolet didn't stop at comfort. They wanted performance buyers too. And so, in both 1970 and 1971, Chevy offered the SS454 package. The 1971 Monte Carlo SS454 was the last year this package would be available. And while visually restrained, it was a genuine muscle car in disguise. Engine: 454 cubic inch, 7.4-liter LS5 big block V8. Horsepower: 365 horsepower at 4,800 RPM, down from 360 in 1970 due to new gross-to-net rating conversion. Torque: 465 pound-feet at 3,400 RPM. Transmission: standard turbo hydromatic 400 automatic. Suspension: heavy-duty F41 suspension with front and rear anti-roll bars. Rear axle: 12-bolt with optional positraction. Brakes: front disc brakes standard. 60 miles to 2, approximately 6.5–7.0 seconds quarter-mile time, low 15s depending on rear gearing and weight. This was a car capable of impressive straight-line acceleration, essentially a Chevelle SS454 in formal wear. The SS454 package wasn't flashy. Unlike the stripe-happy Chevelle or flamboyant Camaro, the Monte Carlo SS wore its power subtly. Small SS454 emblems on the grille and rear fenders. Rally wheels with F70 15 tires. With deep, understated rumble, cowl induction hood was not available, adding to the sleeper image. Plush with wood grain accents and optional bucket seats. More luxury cruiser than street brawler. This low-profile appearance meant the Monte Carlo SS454 often flew under the radar. Why did the Monte Carlo SS454 disappear after just 2 model years? The answer lies in the shifting automotive landscape of 1971. Insurance costs skyrocket. Big block muscle cars like the SS454 were now burdened with sky-high premiums, making them unattractive to younger buyers. Emission regulations begin to bite. New federal rules began to require lower compression ratios and emissions control equipment. The SS454 saw a dip in rated horsepower, even if real performance stayed strong, and more restrictive gear ratios became standard. The market shifts to luxury and practicality. Buyers who wanted power began to shift toward more subtle or comfortable vehicles, while others began prioritizing economy and safety. Chevelle and Camaro dominated the spotlight. In 1971, if you wanted a muscle car from Chevrolet, your first stop was the Chevelle SS or Camaro Z28. The Monte Carlo's heavier curb weight and more refined image made it less of a performance icon, despite similar mechanicals. Chevrolet didn't sell many Monte Carlo SS 454s. 1970, 3,823 units. 1971, 1,919 units. By 1972, the SS 454 package was gone entirely. The Monte Carlo continued, but the muscle was replaced with mild manners. That makes the 1971 model incredibly rare today, a hidden gem among muscle car collectors and a curiosity for enthusiasts who admire restraint and brute power coexisting. Number 9, the 1970 Oldsmobile Rally 350, a bright, bold experiment that tried to bridge the gap between budget muscle and youthful flair, but ultimately missed its mark. Today, we're diving into one of the most curious misfires of the golden muscle car era, the 1970 Oldsmobile Rally 350. This was not your typical Oldsmobile. Drenched in bright Sebring yellow with color-matched bumpers, rally stripes, and loud graphics, the Rally 350 was aimed at younger buyers who wanted the looks of a muscle car without the insurance penalties or high sticker prices of big block beasts. It was Oldsmobile's attempt at youth marketing in a changing landscape. But the Rally 350 turned out to be a car nobody asked for. Oldsmobile's traditional buyers found it too brash. Younger muscle car fans thought it was all show and not enough go. And so, the Rally 350 faded as quickly as it had burst onto the scene, a misunderstood yellow blur. By 1970, the muscle car wars had reached their peak. Horsepower was everywhere. Hemis, Cobra jets, LS6s, Ram Air 4s. But so was something else: insurance companies. Suddenly owning a car with a big block V8 and flashy trim could mean sky-high premiums, especially for young drivers. In response, some manufacturers started experimenting with small block muscle. Cars that looked fast but had lower insurance classifications. Pontiac had the GT37, Ford had the Torino Cobra with a 351, and Oldsmobile decided to create its own budget muscle car with flashy styling. And that led to the Rally 350. Let's get into what made this car unique. The 1970 Oldsmobile Rally 350 was based on the Cutlass S A-body coupe. It used Oldsmobile's reliable, small block engine and came with a distinctive appearance package that made it stand out, and not always in a good way. Key specs: engine, 350 cubic inches, 5.7-liter rocket V8. Horsepower, 310 horsepower at 4,800 RPM. Torque, 390 pound-FIT at 3,200 RPM. Transmission, standard 3-speed manual, optional 4-speed or TH350 automatic. Rear axle, 3.42 gears standard, limited slip optional. Weight, or 3,600 pounds, 0 to 60 mile per hour, around 7 seconds. Quarter mile, mid-15s. Unique features: Sebring yellow paint, code 51, exclusive to this model. Body color bumpers, front and rear. Black and orange rally striping. Olds W25 fiberglass dual scooped hood. Rear spoiler and underbody air deflectors. W30 style exhaust tips. Rally wheels painted yellow. Everything about this car screamed attention-seeking. It was meant to look like a W30, but avoid the insurance penalties of the 455 big block. Here's where the trouble began. Oldsmobile's brand identity in 1970. Meanwhile, younger buyers, the ones attracted to muscle, already had their favorites. If you wanted flashy and fast, you bought a Chevelle SS, Plymouth Duster 340, or Mustang Mach 1. Those cars had stronger reputations and bigger engines. The Rally 350, by contrast, was neither fish nor fowl. Not quite luxurious enough for Oldsmobile loyalists, not fast or affordable enough for the youth market, and too overstyled to appeal to buyers looking for a sleeper. Its flashy paint and bolt-on spoilers turned heads, but not necessarily in a good way. Many buyers thought it looked cheap, even though it wasn't. Oldsmobile hoped the Rally 350 would move significant volume, but reality set in quickly. Total production, 3,547 units. Base price, around $3,200. Not exactly budget-friendly. Dealer feedback, mixed at best. Some refused to stock it. Magazine reviews, praised its looks, but noted that performance didn't match the visual punch. The result? The Rally 350 flopped commercially. It was discontinued after just one model year, and Oldsmobile never tried anything like it again. For decades, the Rally 350 was a curiosity, mocked for its loud colors and limited performance. But in recent years, it's become something of a cult classic among collectors who appreciate its rarity and period-correct flair. Number 8, the 1970 Mercury Cyclone spoiler, a muscle car born from NASCAR ambition, but ultimately lost in the shadow of its more famous Ford cousins. Today's topic takes us into the underappreciated corners of the muscle car era, to a model that came roaring out of Mercury's showrooms with the horsepower, the handling, and the heritage, but never the recognition. I'm talking about the 1970 Mercury Cyclone spoiler, Mercury's attempt to build a street car with NASCAR in its blood. Fast, aggressive, and rare, the Cyclone spoiler was a direct answer to cars like the Dodge Charger Daytona and the Ford Torino Talladega. But unlike its rivals, this Mercury never caught fire in the marketplace. Instead, it faded quietly, a victim of poor marketing, corporate overlap, and consumer confusion. To understand the Cyclone spoiler, you need to understand where it came from. The NASCAR homologation wars of the late 1960s. In the late 60s, NASCAR was booming. Dodge and Plymouth were experimenting with aerodynamic bodywork to gain speed advantages on the superspeedways. Ford responded with the 1969 Torino Talladega, a smoothed-out version of its midsize car, and it did well in NASCAR. Mercury, Ford's upscale division, needed its own homologation car to keep up. The result? The Cyclone spoiler. Originally, Mercury had used the Cyclone spoiler too in 1969 as its NASCAR entry, but production was extremely limited. By 1970, the company redesigned the entire Cyclone line, making the spoiler the street-legal muscle car it hoped would ride the NASCAR wave to showroom glory. The 1970 Cyclone spoiler was not subtle. It featured a long, fastback roofline. It had an aggressively pointed nose, scooped hood, and spoilers. It was painted in high-contrast colors, especially competition orange and grabber green. The shark nose front end with a blacked-out grille gave it an unmistakable identity. Under the skin, Mercury equipped it to perform. Base engine, 429 Cobra Jet V8, 370 horsepower at 5,400 RPM selves, 450 pound-feet of torque at 3,400 RPM. Optionally engine, 429 Super Cobra Jet, drag pack, solid lifters, 780 CFM Holley carb, 375 horsepower, underrated, closer to 400 in reality. Transmission options, 4-speed top-loader manual, C6 automatic, rear end, 3.25 dish 1 standard, optionally 3.91 or 4.3 dish with Detroit locker, super drag pack. Performance, 0 to 60 miles per hour, 6.0 seconds, 1/4 mile, low 14s with SCJ drag pack. In other words, this was a legitimate muscle machine. It could compete with the best, GTOs, Roadrunners, SS396 Chevelles, and even Mustangs. So why didn't the Cyclone spoiler sell? Mercury had always been positioned as the luxury sporty division, slotted between Ford and Lincoln. Unlike Dodge, which leaned into the wild marketing of cars like the Super B and Daytona, Mercury was caught between muscle and maturity. The spoiler name hinted at racing, but the Mercury brand told buyers to expect chrome and comfort. By 1970, insurance companies were targeting high-horsepower cars. The spoiler, with its big 429, was subject to steep premiums, especially for younger buyers. With options, the Cyclone spoiler could easily climb past $4,000, more expensive than many rivals, including its Ford sibling. Mercury never gave the Cyclone spoiler a second chance. Total 1970 Cyclone production, 14,975 today's. Total Cyclone spoiler production, 1,631 estimate. SCJ drag pack cars, very rare, fewer than 100 likely made. By 1971, the Cyclone line was toned down, and the spoiler package quietly disappeared. The Cyclone itself would vanish after 1971, replaced by more conservative offerings in Mercury's increasingly luxury-focused lineup. Today, the 1970 Cyclone spoiler is a hidden gem in the muscle car world. It's rare, fewer than 2,000 made, and far fewer survive, especially SCJ drag pack examples. It's fast. The 429 SCJ was a monster, capable of 13-second quarter-mile times with mild tuning. It's stylish. The shark nose and fastback lines have aged well. It looks both vintage and aggressive. Number 7, the 1973 Pontiac GTO Colonnade, a sobering chapter in the fall of a once proud muscle car icon. Today, we're going to explore a moment when the mighty muscle car movement started to sputter. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the story of the 1973 Pontiac GTO. This wasn't the same fire-breathing GTO that kicked off the muscle car revolution in 1964. No, by 1973, the GOAT had been softened, bloated, and burdened by regulations, insurance fears, and changing public tastes. This was the year the GTO became just another trim level and a shadow of its former self. The 1973 GTO, based on the new Colonnade body style, marks a turning point not just for Pontiac, but for American performance cars as a whole. To understand how we got to the 1973 GTO, let's rewind a bit. The original 1964 GTO, created by John DeLorean and team, invented the formula: big engine plus small car equals big fun. By the late 60s, the GTO had become a cultural phenomenon, but by 1971-72, dark clouds were forming. Insurance premiums on high-performance cars skyrocketed. Federal emissions regulations kicked in, requiring lower compression and smog equipment. Lead was phased out of gasoline, further hurting performance, and a looming fuel crisis would soon rock the industry. In response, GM made sweeping changes to its A-body intermediate line for 1973, leading to the Colonnade series. So what was the 1973 Pontiac GTO? Instead of being its own distinct model, the GTO was now just an option package on the new Le Mans two-door coupe, a platform shared with the new Cutlass, Chevelle, and Skylark. Let's break it down. Design: the Colonnade cars featured a fixed B-pillar, eliminating the hardtop, a bulkier, more crash-compliant front end, 5-mile-per-hour impact bumpers mandated by federal law, a longer, wider stance that gave the GTO a more formal sedan-like look. Gone were the lean lines and aggressive stance of earlier GOATs. Engines: you had three main choices: 400 cu in V8, standard, 230 horsepower, 10.25 to 1 compression, but tuned for regular fuel. Still capable, but not thrilling. 400 cu in with ram air, 250 horsepower, optionally cold air induction setup, adding visual flair and a little grunt. 455 cu in V8, optional. 250 horsepower, more torque, but same peak horsepower. All engines were now net rated, not gross, which reflected real-world output. Still, the raw acceleration of earlier GTOs was gone. Transmission options: 3-speed manual, standard, 4-speed manual optional, increasingly rare. 200/400 automatic, most common. Performance: 0 to 60 miles per hour in the low 8-second range, with 455 quarter mile. Most of the buyers who had once loved the GTO had either moved on or couldn't afford the insurance. The Colonnade styling was also controversial. Enthusiasts saw it as too heavy, too boxy, too civilized. There was also internal competition. The Trans Am, introduced in 1969, had become Pontiac's new muscle flagship by 1973. It had more edge, more marketing, and was still a dedicated performance model. The GTO, by contrast, was now just a trim option buried inside a bloated midsize lineup. Pontiac didn't give up on the GTO name, but they didn't give it much respect either. In 1974, the GTO name was moved to the Ventura Compact, basically a Chevy Nova. That car had some performance cred, 350 V8, 4-speed, but it was clearly a desperation move. It lasted only 1 year. By 1975, the GTO was dead. It wouldn't return until decades later, and even then, it came as a rebadged Australian Holden. The GTO's soul, the balance of power, lightness, and swagger, died with the 1972 model year, and the 1973 Colonnade version was its slow, quiet funeral. So what do we make of the 1973 GTO today? It's a symbol of transition, from the wild muscle era to the more regulated, cautious 1970s. It shows how car makers struggled to adapt to new laws and shifting buyer priorities. It's also an example of how a legendary name can't survive without substance behind it. Number 6, the 1971 Plymouth GTX 440, examining its role, rise, and final fall as one of Mopar's early muscle car flagships. Today's topic is a case study in how even powerful, capable muscle cars could get lost in the shuffle. Not because they were bad machines, but because marketing, timing, and shifting buyer tastes worked against them. We're diving deep into the 1971 Plymouth GTX 440, the final true version of the once proud GTX nameplate. This car had the performance, had the looks, and had the Mopar muscle. But by 1971, it was being eclipsed by its cheaper, louder sibling, the Roadrunner. By 1972, the GTX would vanish as a standalone model, absorbed into a nameplate that once played second fiddle. Let's explore how a flagship muscle car fell off the radar. Let's start with how the GTX came to be. Introduced in 1967, the GTX was marketed as the gentleman's muscle car, a powerful, performance-focused B-body coupe with upscale features. Plymouth gave it standard big block power, starting with the 440 Super Commando and optional 426 Hemi. High-end trim, premium interiors, muscle car performance. It was meant to bridge the gap between raw street brawlers and luxurious cruisers. By 1968, the cheaper, brasher Plymouth Roadrunner was introduced, aimed at younger buyers who wanted power but didn't care about niceties like carpet or chrome trim. And that's where things started to shift. Fast forward to 1971, Plymouth redesigned its B-body platform for this model year. The cars now wore fuselage styling, curvier, longer, lower, and more aerodynamic looking. This would be the last year the GTX existed as a separate model line. Long, low-slung body with a distinctive loop front bumper. Sculpted fenders and a Coke bottle profile. GTX-specific grille and trim, including dual-scooped hood with optional air grabber system, GTX badging and unique taillights. The car looked mean and refined at the same time, befitting its gentleman's muscle car heritage. GTX didn't play around. It came standard with the 440 Super Commando V8, 440 cubic inches, 7.2 liters, 370 horsepower, 480 pound-feet of torque, 4-barrel carburetor, 10.3 1 compression ratio, 446 barrel, 3 2-barrel carbs, 385 horsepower gross rating, 426 Hemi, 425 horsepower gross, rare and expensive. Even the standard engine made the GTX a torque monster, ideal for straight-line acceleration, 20 to 60 miles per hour, 6.2 seconds with 440. Quarter-mile low 14s, top speed, 130 plus miles per hour, hefty curb weight, approximately for 100 pounds, but great traction and gearing helped it launch hard. Torque flied 727 automatic or heavy-duty 4-speed manual, 323/1 rear axle standard, with performance options available. Insurance premiums on big block muscle cars had skyrocketed. Even the base GTX came with a 440, meaning insurance rates were brutal, especially for young buyers. The muscle car era was nearing its end. Federal emissions regulations, unleaded fuel requirements, and the 1973 oil crisis loomed. Buyers were starting to look for economy, not horsepower. Only 2,942 GTXs were sold in 1971. That's less than half the number sold in 1970. Compared to over 55,000 Roadrunners, The GTX was barely a blip. By 1972, Plymouth made a quiet decision. The GTX would no longer exist as a standalone model. Instead, the GTX badge would become an option package on the Roadrunner, available only when you ordered the 440 engine. In other words, the former flagship was now just a trim. The Roadrunner, the one-time cheap version, had effectively replaced the GTX in Plymouth's performance lineup. By 1975, even that 440 GTX option vanished. The nameplate died, and unlike other Mopar legends, it never came back. Today, the 1971 GTX is a highly collectible sleeper. With fewer than 3,000 units made, it's far harder to find than many Chevelles or Mustangs. Even the standard 440 makes it a legitimate muscle car. Fuselage styling is polarizing, but the 1971 GTX wears it well. Because it was overshadowed in its time, prices can still be more reasonable than other Mopars of similar power. Number 5, the 1974 AMC Javelin AMX 401, exploring its power, styling, challenges, and the broader context that led to its disappearance. Today, we're going to explore a car that represents both the peak and the end of an era for American Motors Corporation, the 1974 AMC Javelin AMX 401. This car was AMC's last attempt at muscle car relevance in a decade that was rapidly turning against performance. With its aggressive looks and big 401 cubic inch V8, the Javelin AMX was meant to go toe-to-toe with Ford's Mustang, Chevy's Camaro, and Pontiac's Firebird. And while it had the power and presence, it never quite captured the market, thanks to bad timing, poor marketing, and AMC's financial desperation. By the end of 1974, the AMX variant was gone, and so was AMC's muscle car legacy. Let's begin with context. American Motors Corporation, AMC, was the underdog in Detroit's Big Three dominated muscle car world. Ford had the Mustang, GM had the Camaro and Firebird, Chrysler had the Challenger and Barracuda. AMC, known more for economy cars and Jeep, decided to break into the pony car segment in 1968 with the Javelin, a clean-looking, slightly longer Mustang rival. It had style and was surprisingly well-built. But AMC wanted to push even further. That's where the AMX badge came in. First as a separate two-seat sports car, 1968-1970, and later as a high-performance trim level on the Javelin. The 1974 Javelin AMX was bold, aggressive, and completely unique in its styling. Exterior: long hood, short deck proportions with a massive bulging fender line that ran over the wheels like a muscle-bound shoulder. Full-width egg crate grille that was both menacing and polarizing. AMX trim added unique hood decals, C-stripe graphics, rally gauges, rear spoiler, bold colors like Trans Am red, grasshopper green, and plum crazy style purples. Compared to the relatively tame Camaro or the softening Mustang II, the AMX looked ready to brawl. Interior, sporty but simple. Rally-style dash with round gauges, bucket seats, and optional console. Basic AMC switchgear but functional. While it lacked the polish of GM interiors, it had character and a sense of raw enthusiasm. Now let's talk performance, the heart of the AMX. 401 cubic inch V8, 6.6 liters, 275 horsepower, net due to new SAE ratings. 455 Nm of torque, 4-barrel carburetor, 0.8.5 to 1 compression, high-flow exhaust manifolds. Even with tighter emissions restrictions, this engine was a serious torque monster. It wasn't as high revving as some small block rivals, but it delivered massive low-end grunt, perfect for street push siege pound-sole range. Quarter-mile in mid-14 top speed over 120 miles per hour, available with a 4-speed manual or torque command automatic. Unfortunately, 1974 was a disastrous year for muscle cars across the board, and it was worse for small companies like AMC. New federal emissions rules choked output and required costly exhaust and carburetor tuning. Buyers, especially young men, faced massive insurance costs for any car with a V8 over 350 cubic inches. The 1973 oil embargo led to skyrocketing gas prices and fuel shortages. Big V8s were suddenly unpopular, even among gearheads. AMC was bleeding cash. Management shifted focus to survival. That meant compact economy cars like the Gremlin and Hornet, and doubling down on the profitable Jeep brand. As a result, the AMX became a casualty of AMC's retreat from performance. Despite being one of the best driving and best-looking Javelins AMC ever built, the 1974 AMX was doomed. AMC sold only 4,980 Javelin AMX units in 1974, a tiny number compared to Ford or GM. By 1975, the entire Javelin line was discontinued. AMC shifted full focus to economy cars and off-roaders. There would be no 1975 AMX, no replacement Javelin, no pony car successor. AMC's muscle car program was officially over. Number 4, the 1970 Ford Torino Cobra 429, examining its powertrain, design, historical context, and ultimate disappearance from the muscle car scene. Today, we take a deep dive into one of the less celebrated but technically formidable muscle cars of the golden era, the 1970 Ford Torino Cobra 429. In a time when GM was pushing limits with Chevelles and GTOs, and Mopar was making waves with Hemis and six-packs, Ford needed a serious response. That response came not in the Mustang, but in something larger, meaner, and less obvious. The Torino Cobra with its 429 cubic inch Super Cobra Jet V8. Yet despite its brutal straight-line power and impressive engineering, the Torino Cobra would quickly fade into the shadows. A victim of shifting trends, poor marketing, and the end of the muscle car era. Let's start with what the Torino was meant to be. In 1970, Ford redesigned the Torino line, positioning it as its intermediate model, replacing the Fairlane as the backbone of Ford's midsize offerings. While most Torino models were sedans and family coupes, Ford also offered a high-performance variant, the Cobra, which was aimed squarely at the likes of the Chevelle SS, Roadrunner, and GTO. But where the Mustang had become the go-to for style-conscious youth, the Torino Cobra was a no-nonsense bruiser, built for speed and quarter-mile credibility. The 1970 Torino was radically different from the previous year, longer, wider, and lower. It featured a Coke bottle body style with aggressive curves that mimic both muscle and motion. The fastback sports roof body was standard, sleek and aerodynamic. Minimal chrome, the Cobra had a no-frills look, with performance-focused cues. Standard blacked-out grille, optional shaker hood scoop, and functional hood pins. Cobra badging was subtle. This car didn't need to shout. Unsupported Magnum 500 wheels and performance tires completed the look. It was visually aggressive, but without the flashiness of a Roadrunner or Judge. The Cobra was more menace than muscle pomp. Let's move to the real heart of the matter, performance. At the top of the Cobra engine menu sat the 429 cubic inch Super Cobra Jet, SCJ, a big block monster built for drag strip duty. 429 CU in Super Cobra Jet, rated at 375 horsepower gross at 5,600 RPM, 400 pound-feet of torque. High lift solid lifter camshaft, Holley 780 CFM 4-barrel carburetor, special 4-bolt main block. Optimizer drag pack included engine oil cooler 3.91 or 4.30 rear axle gears, Detroit locker differential. Despite the 375 horsepower rating, real-world output was likely well over 400 horsepower, and with massive torque, it could easily tear through the quarter mile. 4-speed, top-loader manual or C6 automatic. Hurst shifter included with the manual optional shaker hood scoop shook under throttle, both functional and dramatic. While the engine was fierce, handling was not the Cobra's strong suit. Leaf spring rear suspension, front coils and a stabilizer bar. Power front disc brakes were available, but not standard. Steering was heavy and vague at high speeds. This was a car designed to go fast in a straight line, not carve corners. Still on the drag strip, a Super Cobra Jet Torino with the drag pack was a weapon, capable of 13-second quarter-mile times with slicks. Here's where the story starts to falter. Despite its performance capability, the Torino Cobra was never a high-profile muscle car. Why? Ford focused its performance advertising on the Mustang Mach-1 and Boss models. The Cobra was rarely featured in ads or dealer promotions. The Cobra looked like a fleet car with big wheels. No cartoon birds or psychedelic paint schemes. it lacked the youthful appeal of a Chevelle SS or a Judge. Insurance premiums were rising. Gas prices were creeping upward. Emissions regulations were looming. Buyers were moving away from raw performance and towards style, economy, or luxury. The result? While GM sold tens of thousands of Chevelle SS models in 1970, only around 7,675 Cobra sports roof models were built, and only a fraction of those had the SCJ drag pack setup. Number 3, the 1971 Chevrolet El Camino SS 454, covering its engineering, design, market position, and legacy as a niche but powerful muscle-era anomaly. Today we examine one of the most unusual but fascinating creations of the American muscle car era, the 1971 Chevrolet El Camino SS 454. While it wore the skin of a truck, the El Camino SS 454 wasn't built for hauling mulch. It was built to haul asphalt, blending brute muscle car power with pickup utility. At its most extreme, it packed the same LS5 454 cubic inch V8 found in Chevrolet's top muscle machines. Yet despite its performance chops, the El Camino SS 454 was a niche within a niche. Launched just as the muscle car world was collapsing under the weight of new regulations, rising insurance premiums, and changing public taste. Let's unpack how this muscle truck hybrid went from street demon to historical footnote in a flash. To understand the SS 454 version, we need to understand the El Camino concept. The El Camino was Chevy's answer to Ford's Ranchero, originally introduced in 1959 and reborn in 1964 as a Chevelle-based ute, half-passenger car, half-pickup truck. By 1971, the El Camino was firmly based on the mid-size Chevelle platform, which meant it shared engines, suspension, interiors, and even trim levels with the muscle cars of the day. This allowed the El Camino to be optioned not just as a mild-mannered hauler, but as a full-blown muscle vehicle, complete with the Super Sport SS package and access to Chevrolet's most potent big-block V8s. The 1971 El Camino received the same front-end styling update as the Chevelle, a split front grille with twin headlights and broad rectangular taillights. With the SS 454 package, it took on an even more aggressive persona. SS badging on grille and tailgate, domed cowl induction hood, optional but iconic, rally wheels and raised white letter tires, bold racing stripes on hood and deck with the right options, blacked out grille and special trim to match its Chevelle SS sibling. From the front, it looked nearly identical to a Chevelle SS. But from the side or rear, the pickup bed gave it a completely different silhouette. It was both practical and extreme, a truck with street racing intentions. Now for the main attraction, performance. In 1971, the most potent engine available in the El Camino SS was the LS5 454 V8, rated at 365 horsepower net and 0.500 pounds-feet of torque. Displacement, 454 cubic inches, 7.4 liters. Carburation, quadrajet 4-barrel carb. Compression ratio 8.5 to 1, down from 10.25 to 1 in 1970. It's important to note that Chevrolet still listed gross horsepower ratings in 1971, and the LS5 was often quoted as making up to 450 horsepower gross. Though real-world output varied, the SS package in 1971 was more than just a big engine. Heavy-duty suspension, springs, shocks, sway bars, power front disc brakes, sport mirrors, striping, and blacked-out trim. Dual exhaust with chrome tips. 12-bolt rear axle. Buyers could also add Posey traction, limited slip differential, power steering, air conditioning, and other creature comforts. The result was a truck that handled like a muscle car, could outrun many coupes, and still haul tools and lumber during the week. A truly bizarre but appealing dual-purpose machine. Despite its absurd power and appeal, the El Camino SS 454 was not a huge seller, and here's why. 1971 marked the beginning of the end for true muscle cars. GM, including Chevrolet, lowered compression ratios to accommodate unleaded gasoline and prepare for emissions equipment like EGR and catalytic converters. This reduced power across the board. The SS454 was flagged by insurers as a high-risk performance vehicle, regardless of its pickup bed. Young buyers, its natural audience, were priced out. While cool, a muscle pickup was never going to outsell a Chevelle or Camaro. It simply didn't appeal to either traditional truck buyers or pure muscle enthusiasts. GM restricted some high-performance packages from certain platforms, and as the LS6454 was dropped, even the El Camino's performance ceiling got lowered. Number 2. The 1973 Dodge Charger Rally 400, a car that tried to keep the muscle era alive during a time of rising regulation, insurance hikes, and changing automotive priorities. Today, we explore a car that embodied the struggle of Detroit's muscle car movement in the early 1970s, the 1973 Dodge Charger Rally 400. Once a symbol of brute force and street dominance, the Charger had become something else entirely by 1973. Larger, heavier, and increasingly constrained by a new wave of federal regulations. Amid this transformation, Dodge introduced the Rally trim, attempting to preserve the Charger's muscle car identity, even as the golden age of American performance faded into history. To understand the 1973 model, we must first understand what the Charger nameplate meant. The 1966 Charger debuted as a fastback version of the Coronet, but it was the 1968-70 Coke bottle generation that made it a star. By 1970, the Charger had become a legend, thanks to its powerful RT, road track, variants, Hemi and 440 Magnum engines, and appearances in movies like Bullitt and The Dukes of Hazzard. By 1971, Dodge redesigned the Charger onto the Chrysler B-body platform, shared with the Coronet and Satellite. The new body was sleeker but heavier, and a shift toward luxury and comfort began to undermine its performance reputation. The 1973 Dodge Charger was part of the second-generation B-body redesign, and it marked a clear departure from its aggressive, track-ready origins. New 5-mile-per-hour crash bumpers up front due to federal safety mandates. More emphasis on creature comforts and smoother ride quality. The body grew heavier and more ornate, with design cues leaning toward personal luxury. Wheelbase 115 inches, curb weight approaching 4,000 pounds. This wasn't a car made for quarter miles anymore, at least not without compromises. With the RT badge dropped after 1971, Dodge introduced the Rally trim in 1972 as a performance-themed package for the declining muscle crowd. The 1973 Charger Rally was the only model to carry Dodge's fading muscle car legacy forward. Rally decals and stripes, unique louvered taillights, Rally suspension package with heavy-duty shocks and anti-roll bars, optional hood pins, dual exhaust, and mag wheels. Bucket seats and a floor-mounted shifter with console, optional. But the real soul of the Rally was in what lived under the hood. The top engine in the 1973 Rally lineup was the 400 cubic inch, 6.6-liter V8, known as the 400 Magnum. Output, 280 horsepower, net, and 375 pound-feet of torque. Carburetor, 4-barrel. Compression ratio, 8.2 to 1, down from earlier years to meet emissions and unleaded fuel requirements. This was no slouch. The 400 Magnum had decent torque and mid-range pull, especially with the optional Torque Flight automatic and a 3.23 rear axle. However, even with its solid displacement and muscle car DNA, by 1973, several trends were choking out the muscle car market, and the Charger Rally 400 was not immune. New federal mandates pushed compression ratios lower, restricted timing curves, and added EGR valves and air pumps. This resulted in significant horsepower losses, a far cry from the 375-plus horsepower 440s of just a few years earlier. High horsepower cars like the Charger Rally were heavily penalized by insurance companies. Even younger buyers with good driving records faced punishing rates for anything with a 4-barrel V8. Safety features and added luxury, bloated curb weight. With a curb weight over 4,000 pounds, even a 280 horsepower engine struggled to feel fast. Gas prices were rising, consumers began prioritizing comfort, economy, and safety. Performance had become a liability rather than a selling point. The 1973 Charger Rally was a sales compromise. It offered the visual trappings of a muscle car without the insurance sting of a 440 or Hemi. Many buyers opted for 318 or 360 cubic inch small blocks, which were cheaper and more manageable. In total, fewer than 10,000 Rally models were sold for 1973, a small fraction of total Charger production. And by 1974, the Charger's identity would shift even further, becoming less of a performance icon and more of a personal luxury coupe, eventually merging spiritually with the Dodge Cordoba. Number 1, the 1972 Mercury Cougar XR7 351 Cobra Jet, a car that tried to straddle two identities, luxury and muscle, during a period of seismic change in the American automotive landscape. Today we'll examine the 1972 Mercury Cougar XR7 351 Cobra Jet, a car that encapsulates the tension between two diverging automotive philosophies in the early 1970s. Raw performance and plush personal luxury. In an era dominated by insurance hikes, emissions regulations, and shifting consumer preferences, this Cougar found itself stuck in the middle, with one paw in the muscle car era and the other in a new world of cushioned comfort and image over action. The Mercury Cougar debuted in 1967 as Mercury's answer to the wildly successful Ford Mustang. Built on the same basic platform as the Mustang, the Cougar was designed to be a more refined pony car, one with a longer wheelbase, elegant styling, and more upscale interior features. By the time the second generation arrived in 1971, the Cougar had grown substantially in size, weight, and ambition. No longer just a Mustang in a tuxedo, it had evolved into a personal luxury coupe that competed more with the Pontiac Grand Prix and Chevrolet Monte Carlo than with traditional muscle cars. Mercury introduced luxury trims like the XR7, while still offering powerful engine options to appeal to performance enthusiasts, and that's where the 1972 Cougar XR7 351 Cobra Jet comes in. The 1972 Cougar XR7 was part of the final year of the second-generation body style, and its mission was clear: combine high-end comfort with potent performance. Long hood, short deck styling, typical of the muscle era, hidden headlights behind a vertical slat grille, giving it a signature Mercury front end. XR7 trim added leather vinyl upholstery, wood grain dash, extra sound insulation, and chrome accents. Open vinyl top and wire wheel covers gave it a borderline Lincoln vibe. Despite the plush appearance, the XR7 could be equipped with some very serious engines. The heart of the 1972 Cougar XR7's muscle credentials was the 351 cubic inch Cobra Jet V8. Engine specs: 1972 351 CJ. Displacement: 351 cubic inches. Carburetor: 4-barrel. Horsepower: 266 horsepower net at 5,400 RPM. Torque: 301 pound-feet net at 3,400 RPM. Compression ratio: 8.6 to 1. Available with automatic or 4-speed manual transmission. Optionally 3.25 or 3.50 rear axle ratio for added punch. This engine was not to be confused with the earlier 428 Cobra Jet monsters, but within the constraints of 1972 emissions laws, it still packed respectable performance. Unfortunately, that power came with compromises. By 1972, the American muscle car was under siege from all directions. 1972 was the first year manufacturers were required to report net horsepower. New federal mandates required EGR valves, air pumps, and lower compression ratios. These strangled output, reduced throttle response, and made the cars feel sluggish compared to just a few years earlier. By the early 1970s, insurers began targeting performance models. XF7s with Cobra Jets were flagged as high risk, discouraging younger buyers. These changes turned what could have been a real performance machine into a compromised product. Powerful, but no longer thrilling. One of the Cougar XR7 351 CJ's greatest challenges was its split personality. On one hand, it looked and felt like a plush Grand Tourer, leather seating, simulated wood grain, smooth ride with optional power everything. On the other, it had serious performance parts, big block-style torque from a small block engine, optioning packages and manual transmission. This duality confused the market. Buyers who wanted a luxury coupe didn't care about horsepower, and performance buyers didn't want a vinyl-roofed cruiser. Mercury tried to be both, and in doing so, satisfied few. After 1972, Mercury fully embraced the luxury direction. In 1974, the Cougar was moved to the intermediate Ford Torino LTD2 platform and repositioned as a near-luxury